Hey, what's going on? Today we're talking to Garry Tonon. We're going to find out his side of the Danaher Death Squad breakup, what it would take for him to come to the UFC, and most importantly, where does he find all these pics for Instagram? What's up, everybody? Garry fucking Tonon in the house. What's up, Garry?
What's up, guys? Thanks so much for having me, man.
Yeah, no worries, man. So we were talking a little bit before we started rolling about the ADCC trials, and you brought up a cool fact that like all the refs are from Finland, and we couldn't figure out why. Care to speculate on that?
Yeah, sure, man. So I was saying, like, even when I asked them, because I was thinking the same thing when I found that out, like one of the first couple ADCCs, I was talking to them and just finding out like where they were from, because the first ADCC I was a part of was in Beijing, China in 2013. And basically, it's unlike some of the ADCCs that you see now, which have like huge audiences. They've been throwing them, like the last one was in California, right? So like there was a huge amount of jiu-jitsu fans there. But when we did it in Beijing, China, there really wasn't that many people. So, I mean, basically all the competitors of the event and the organizers and the referees and stuff, like, we were all we had, you know what I mean? Like to hang out with and talk to and stuff like that. So I got to meet some of them out there and speak with them. And like, yeah, it turns out most of them are from Finland. I couldn't really fully ascertain exactly how that happened. I'm guessing like one of the guys that they first asked to be a referee just happened to be from there, and then asked a bunch of his buddies to get involved. They all have really big martial arts backgrounds and stuff. Some of them fought, some of them did jiu-jitsu for a long time, and this, that, and the other thing. But so because of the fact that they were from Finland and because of all the COVID stuff, it was really difficult to get them all down to referee. So I think that was a hiccup in the organization of ADCC trials. I know Tom's been working really, really hard, Tom DeBlas, on getting that event out there. And they just had it, I guess, this past weekend, and went really well, pretty smoothly, especially considering this was the biggest one they've ever had with all the competitors and everything. But yeah, there was a lot of things to set up, man. And that was one of them that was really tough. There's so many people from so many different countries to get out there,
So what are some of the differences that you saw from your first ADCC to like talking about the trials now in terms of the level of competition over the last few years? And really, and we'll talk more about the Danaher Death Squad later, but you and a few of the guys like Gordon, I think were pivotal people in how the no-gi grappling game has evolved and changed. So talk about the competition level now versus, 10 years ago.
Yeah, so it's interesting because you still see some of the same guys, right? So 2013 ADCC, Cyborg was in the tournament, Bushesha was in the tournament, I was there. There's some guys that are missing now, like Krone. Krone retired after that ADCC, but he was very good. It's not like I necessarily think the level of jiu-jitsu changed in terms of how tough guys were. I think jiu-jitsu in general has changed, and most of the guys are still involved. Like there's a few guys that retired or like it was the end of their career. Like for example, like Gilbert Burns, Dorino, was competing in that ADCC in China, I believe. And I think that might have been the last one that or maybe he did Brazil after that. Maybe, yeah, he did Brazil. So he did 2015 as well. So then, he started getting super serious with mixed martial arts. I think he was already fighting at the time, but, now we just saw him fight for a title, right? So obviously some of these guys, went different directions in their career. Some guys retired and things, but ultimately, like a lot of the players are still the same, but I definitely think that the landscape of jiu-jitsu has changed quite a bit since that ADCC in 2013. Like the amount of leg locking that was being done really was, has really changed dramatically. Like basically in 2015, when we were competing in Brazil, it was kind of like me and Eddie were the main guys that were, Eddie Cummings, were the main guys that were like trying to attack people's legs. And then I think by the time we got to, I think the next one was Finland, maybe. I think by the time we got there, people were starting to pick it up a little bit more and be a little bit more conscious of it. But even then it was kind of a slow start. But now, like when you watch trials, like if anybody just watched ADCC trials that just came up and was super packed, super stacked, all the divisions and stuff, there's tons of like leg locking going on. Everybody's competent. Like, our guy, even some of the guys that were trained by us, competing against like some of these other guys, like, you see these other guys are starting to pick it up, like we put out all these DVDs and stuff. And like, we've been competing for a long enough time that everybody's watching tape. And like, man, like it's the landscape's changed a lot. Like jujitsu's just changed a lot in the last several years for many reasons, not just for technique. Also, just like I was explaining before, like how we were doing ADCC Beijing in 2013, and there's like nobody in the stands, and now like it's a packed house when they're doing ADCC. So, and the landscape of jiu-jitsu in terms of like it becoming a spectator sport has changed a lot too. I know you didn't ask about that, but that's also something that I've noticed has changed a lot from that ADCC to now.
Yeah, it's grown a lot. And you mentioned that a lot of the guys are, going down different paths, and you obviously being one of those. The first time that I saw you compete live, I had heard your name a few times, but the first time I really saw you compete was in one championship against Aoki. You had a grappling match, and just knowing Shinya Aoki being a great judoka, a very good jiu-jitsu guy, was great with rubber guard, used to wear the pants all the time. And I remember talking to Denny Prokopis before that, and he's like, Gary's going to smash him. He's something special. And I was like, really? Wow, you're super confident. I think he even called it. I think he said he's going to heel hook him under like 5 minutes. I think he caught him in like 4 or something. You heel hooked him so making the transition into MMA, there's only been a few guys like Paul Harris, Eminari, Ryan Hall, and yourself that are, I mean, obviously you guys are well-rounded jiu-jitsu practitioners, but the leg lock game is an integral part of what you're bringing in from the BJJ to the MMA space. One of the things that I've always said is that, that can be a big risk factor too, because you really have to abandon dominant position to get a lot of the leg locks. What's been like the biggest transition for you changing up your BJJ game going into MMA?
Yeah. So it's tricky because I think a lot of people go about going into MMA and thinking about jiu-jitsu to MMA transition a little bit incorrectly. Or, I mean, I guess not as efficient as they could. I shouldn't say incorrect, but like, I think that's what most people think is like, oh yeah, I'm just going to like tweak a few things. And like, yeah, now I'll have a jiu-jitsu for MMA game. And it was not like that. Like it's a lot more complicated. I had to learn whole new skills. So one of the things that John told me when I first started doing MMA, and he was kind of sitting down with me saying, hey, before we like even get into training, I want you to understand the sport a little bit better, right? Because you've been doing jiu-jitsu this whole time, and that's a sport that you understand backwards and forwards, and you totally get it. But right now, like you're just a spectator of MMA. Like you've never really been a part of it outside of the jiu-jitsu portion of it, and like training with other MMA athletes. But like, before you really get heavily involved in the sport and it becomes something that's your career, like I think it would benefit you to better understand how this all works. And he thinks that a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions about how MMA works and what it is as a sport. I think a lot of people, even to this day, it's getting better, but I think a lot of people, even to this day, just kind of look at MMA as one of those things where there's a bunch of different martial arts and we're just mashing them together. And it's like, oh, I'm going to go to my kickboxing coach. We're going to hang out. We're going to do some kickboxing moves. And then I'm going to go to my boxing coach. I'm going to get that done. And then I'm going to go do wrestling, and then I'm going to go to my jiu-jitsu coach. I'm going to do all these different martial arts. And then like, when it's time to fight, we'll just figure it out.
Yeah. Let's just wing it. What can be different? Well, that's what like people that train in the gi, all their life, and then they take the gi off and they lose those grips and they lose those positions. I try to explain to people that like and obviously you're at a much higher level in terms of competition, but like the difference between gi to no gi, it's the same chasm of difference from no gi to MMA. You have to re-strategize and rethink things. And I think it was Carlson Gracie Sr. said the best way to make a black belt a brown belt is you hit him once. You want to make him a purple belt, you hit him twice. And like there's that give and take of I've got to accept kind of risk reward factor when you're doing those things. Do you still primarily look to go into the leg lock and Ashigurami game, or are you? I mean, obviously your hands have come leaps and bounds, but is that still your main focus when you're going into fights?
It's not. I wouldn't say it's my main focus. I mean, I still train jiu-jitsu every day because, like anything, like jiu-jitsu is a perishable skill. This is something that John constantly drills in our heads. Like, I can't just like focus on striking all day, every day, never do jiu-jitsu, and then like expect to still be as good at jiu-jitsu in my fights or elsewhere that I ever was. So it's something that I think I constantly needs refinement. I constantly need to pay attention to it and improve my skills every day, even though mixed martial arts is now the sport that I do instead of jiu-jitsu. But having said that, like we do MMA specific practices where, and this is what the point that I was trying to get at before, where it's not just like mashing a bunch of skills together. Like it's whole new skills, right? So like wall wrestling, for example, doesn't exist in another martial art. Like there's wrestling, but there's never a fucking wall. Like it's a totally different thing. And I know that sounds silly. You're like, oh yeah, well you just add the wall in, but it's like, no, it's completely different. It's like, oh, what's your main defensive tool when you're up against the wall? Or sorry, what's your main defensive tool in wrestling? Oh, I keep my legs away from you. I kick my legs back. I sprawl, right? Well, now we're up against the wall. We can't do that anymore, right? So like it changes the entire, like wall wrestling is a totally different sport, theoretically. Obviously, it's not a real sport. I'm sure there might be some competitions out there somewhere, like, you know, who knows what people are putting on, but for the most part, wall wrestling is not a sport. You have to learn how to do that, right? So I'm integrating my grappling into these totally new skills. Shoot boxing, for example. You could argue that there's kind of sports that integrate wrestling or standing takedowns with striking. Like there are some sports that do that. But for the most part, it's kind of a new thing. Like to integrate my ability to take somebody down with my ability to strike, that's a whole new skill. It's totally different. Like I consider myself to be a half decent wrestler, even just in pure wrestling. Like, I don't think I'd be like competitive with like the elite college wrestlers or like, you know, elite Olympic athletes, but I would consider myself as amongst jiu-jitsu athletes to have some pretty goddamn good wrestling. But if you had taken me without learning how to do shoot boxing and put me into a mixed martial arts fight, it would have been a fucking disaster. I would have had no idea how to set up shots. All your setups for shots when you're doing jiu-jitsu involve contact with the other person. Oh, well, I have a collar tie. I have a wrist. I have all these things. You don't have any of those things when you're fighting somebody. It's totally different. So, yeah, man, I think the main focus has been learning those integrated skills more than anything else. And then like, yeah, like if I get an opportunity to get onto someone's legs and then submit them, great. And that piece I already have figured out. But I would say the main focus was learning those integral skills, especially for the first few years of my training in MMA.
You know? So John's your MMA coach too, right?
Yes, correct.
So
John's my every coach.
He's your one-stop shop, you know, and it's so funny. You like it's
like
that sounds.
Tons of different shit.
You're right, yeah, for sure. It's like, oh, you need one of those? I got one. Yeah, he's like, he's like the guy from the old remember the old Gremlins movie where the Gremlins where he's like got all these new gadgets he's always creating and new ways to do things. The dad. So, did you at any point when you decided you wanted to make the leap into MMA think about maybe going to a team that's more established in the MMA space, or from the get-go were you just having the dialogue with John and you felt comfortable this is going to be the guy to guide my MMA game, my hands, and every aspect?
Yeah, I felt pretty comfortable working with John on everything all together and not like trying to jump to somewhere that had like an MMA camp or whatever the case may be. I had been around for quite a while, and like don't get me wrong, like I hadn't gone to every single MMA camp that there was and talked to every single coach that there was, but I had been exposed to some coaches and striking and things like that, and ultimately, like when I would hear some of these guys talk and see some of these guys coach and watch other teams do drills and all these different things, like I wasn't. It's hard for me to say this because, you know, everybody's going to shit on me when I say this because, well, to be fair, I'm an undefeated fighter about to fight for the title. So, I mean, I guess there's a little bit more weight behind my words nowadays than there used to be. So maybe I am in a point where I'm allowed to say something like this, but I wasn't that impressed, to be honest, with like a lot of what I had heard people, you know, doing in coaching. And even to this day, like when I'm watching like high level UFC events and I hear somebody speaking in the corner to their fighters that are supposed to be these like, I'm not going to call anybody out, but are supposed to be these amazing striking coaches. And I hear the advice they're giving and I'm just like, what the fuck is happening here? Like I don't even want to give any specific examples because it's going to make things even worse for me. But like, it's pretty crazy, the types of advice and coaching that are happening. Now, obviously I don't get to see everything that's happening behind closed doors. And just because you yell some stupid shit out between rounds, does that necessarily mean you're as a whole a terrible coach and you can't add anything to your athlete's skills? No, it doesn't. But it definitely rubs me the wrong way. And it definitely makes me go, yeah, I don't know if I really want to have this person involved in like my athletic career. And I've just worked a lot with John over the years. I feel like he has a pretty good head on his shoulders for a lot of this stuff. The way he explains things is just second to none. And I just felt very, very comfortable. I mean, it's not like he's never worked with mixed martial arts athletes either. He's worked with the highest level mixed martial arts athletes.
Yeah. And
he worked with George St. Pierre. He worked with Chris Weidman. He's worked with Rory McDonald. Like all of these guys have been coming to him for mixed martial arts advice, not just jiu-jitsu, for years. So.
Yeah, I had Matt Serra on, who's one of the OGs, and he was saying the same thing, that I think Matt was one of the first people that John would come up and coach for MMA and stuff, and he liked bringing him in because he saw things through a different prism, and obviously, I mean, John's arguably the best jiu-jitsu coach, and he sees things. He has a philosophy degree, so he sits people down and goes through all the different nuances of that stuff. So you said you're 5-0, you're fighting for a title. That fight just got pushed back. The problem is you're fighting overseas, and so many Americans want to see you fight here. And I think the biggest question in everyone's mind is, what's it going to take for you to come fight in the UFC? Is that a consideration you've ever had?
Yeah, I mean, hey, like I've said this many times before. It's like what I'm doing in my career now is like I'm going to go wherever I think is best for me at a given point in time, and where I'm going to be able to find the challenges that I need to try to become the greatest mixed martial artist possible. And right now, I feel like I have plenty of challenges at one championship. Like I still have to fight for a title. I still have to win that title, and then I have aspirations to win another title at 170. There. And I think there's some tough guys in that weight class as well. And I think there's even some tough guys still within my weight class that even if I won the title, like I'm going to have some tough fights with that are important to my progression and important to building my record. And like, like Martin Nguyen is, he lost the title and he is definitely somebody I'm looking forward to fighting before I absolutely see so many other people there. Shinya Aoki is another one. Christian Lee, like there's a lot of really tough guys at one that I think I would like to have an opportunity to fight, especially like, I signed a contract with them, like, I think like last fight or whatever. So like, I got a while and I'm probably going to win the championship. Like at least that's the way that I think anyway. So
that automatically, I think if I remember the old one agreements, I think they had a championship clause where if you were the champ, it automatically extended it for a period of time.
Yeah. Basically the idea, yes and no. Like, yes, that's in the contract, but also I think that the way they've put it to me, it's like once you win the championship, we're basically like ripping up the contract and making a new one, right? So, like in theory, like when I win the championship, I'm going to be signed with them again, for an extended period of time. So, I'm looking at my field of competition and saying like, yeah, like it makes sense to still be here and still fight like all these really tough guys. It's not like I look at the field of competition and go like, man, I've really outgrown this organization. I have nobody left to fight. There's no challenges ahead of me. If I felt that way, then like, yeah, okay, let's start talking to another organization. But I don't really feel that way. Like, I really feel like there's a lot of challenges to be presented and a lot of tests that, hey, man, it sucks. Sure. Like in some regards to not be able to compete in front of, the American fan base. And I mean, it's still yet to be said. Like, I know that one has aspirations of potentially doing fights in the US. I think they spoke with me about possible plans at some point to do something in Hawaii. So like it's yet to be seen or said that like maybe I might fight in front of an American audience, even with one championship. And at the end of the day, I mean, we're in the age of social media where like, man, I've been to professional fights, the UFC and otherwise, and like I could be sitting right next to the goddamn cage, and guess what I'm watching? Probably the TV
the
next
monitor.
to it.
That's what I say. I've been to like 50 UFCs, and like it's the same thing. You're sitting in the first row and you're looking up at the monitor because it's the best shot, the best angle. I think everyone should go once for the experience, but really, I mean, like buying the pay-per-view or watching on TV, the commentary adds such a value and depth of knowledge and what's going on too. So you fought over in one championship a bunch of times. When you made that first step into the cage, and that's a big stage, right? I mean, at least, especially when they're in, like the Philippines, and they get huge venues filled up. What were your nerves like? Were there nerves involved? Were you felt pretty confident? What was your headspace?
Yeah, man, I still get nervous before fights. It's a totally different thing. I had heard people say it before I had started fighting. Like I had heard people say like, oh yeah, like the difference in like, competing in jiu-jitsu and the nerves involved in that to the nerves involved in fighting. Like it's a total big, huge difference. I think Tom, maybe said that to me a bunch of times, and like, it made sense. Like I obviously understood that could be the case. I mean, a fist fight in a cage is a lot different than like a grappling match where we're like, slap hands, bump fists, and like, whatever happens, happens. And like, I'll tap if I'm about to get my leg broken, no big deal. Right.
Well, there's also a financial component on the line too. Like when you're grappling, you're not making nearly, for the most part, most people aren't making nearly the money they're making when they fight. So there's also there's a lot more on the line in terms of like coming out with a win in a fight to win versus a big stage, like the title. More pressure.
Now, ironically, in my case, I would say yes and no to that. In most cases, for most people, by the time they're fighting in the UFC, yeah, probably it's probably for a much bigger payday than anything that they would get in grappling. For me, though, because I had been on the forefront of the sport, right? So basically, I led the submission only movement. Myself, Gordon, Eddie Cummings, and all the guys from our team, like, you know, we were the spearhead of like this movement where we're going to do these sub only competitions. People are going to get paid money to see them. Like, dude, the landscape in jiu-jitsu now, you're a blue belt and you can get paid money to compete in a fight to win. Like, it's fucking wild. Like, that was never a possibility back when I first started doing jiu-jitsu. Like, people have no idea how good they had it right now as far as the jiu-jitsu is concerned. So for me, I had actually worked my way up to competing on a level where, I mean, when I was doing EDIs, like, there were times that I walked away with $20,000, right? So like, I mean, it's a pretty big payday. And like, that's pretty comparable to what I started making in MMA, right? So money-wise, it didn't change too much, at least not at the beginning. Like, I'm definitely making considerably more money now fighting than I would for a jiu-jitsu match. So like, yes, now I would agree with you. But in my first few fights, my first like 5 fights, it wasn't that different from like some of the bigger shows or big tournaments that I would do in jiu-jitsu. For me, more it has to do with the consequences of fighting. For me, the nerves came from like, holy shit, like in a split second, in the blink of an eye, I could catch an elbow, knee, or a kick or a punch that literally just ends this thing like immediately. And like in jiu-jitsu, that really doesn't quite happen that way. Every so often, yeah, you see somebody get flying armbarred or triangled or something, or like, you know, me with a flying scissor takedown into a heel hook. Like, yeah, like, yes, it does happen. It's not as common though. It's more of a slow burn, right? Like, you get into a bad spot, then you get into a worse spot, then you get into submission danger, and now you're submitted, right? There's some warning kind of ahead of time, right? And there's things you can do. Like, dude, in fighting, I duck into the wrong direction and the guy throws up a high kick and like my hands aren't quite where they're supposed to be. And it's just over. Like, it's literally
sometimes
over.
Yeah, sometimes you don't even find out that your hands weren't where they were supposed to be until someone wakes you up on the canvas and they tell you, hey, your hands, they weren't up. Like, yeah, so
it's fucking terrifying, man.
Do you have any plans to still compete in BJJ?
Yeah, man. I definitely still interested in competing in jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu is kind of my first love in terms of martial arts, and like, you know, it's a much more relaxed experience than fighting. Like, I remember after my first fight, I literally said, you know, I don't remember who was asking, if it was John, Tom, or somebody else. Maybe it was in a public interview. I'm not sure. They were like, hey, so how did it feel like your first fight? And I was like, this should be illegal. Like, nobody should be allowed to do this. This is not okay, because on any level, like, I don't know what we're doing in here. I don't know how I'm in a cage fighting another grown man. This is insane. But yeah, dude, like, I definitely still want to compete in jiu-jitsu, but MMA is kind of my main focus now. So it kind of has to happen within the context of like a lull in my fighting. You know, if I find out like, all right, like, I'm not going to be fighting for 6 months or something, then I can plan a jiu-jitsu match, right? And it also has to be somewhat meaningful. Like, I'm not looking to compete in jiu-jitsu for no reason, like just against like nobody. Like, I'd be competing against one of the tough up and comers that are there, or like, you know, some guy that I either had like a tough match with who I think would be an exciting match, or another, you know, superstar mixed martial artist or something where I think it turns heads and it means something to somebody. Like, I'm not looking to just to compete now in like a local Naga or something like that. It just doesn't make any sense for me. It also just doesn't make sense for my athletic career. Like, you know, I'm getting older now. I just turned 30. Not that I'm crazy, you know, old or anything like that, but, you know, I see the clock ticking, and I know I only have so many years on my athletic clock, and in terms of injuries and things like that, it would be silly to get involved in a match that doesn't mean something and get hurt or something like that. You know what I mean?
So yeah, no, for sure. I mean, and talking about competing and stuff, you had a unique experience that you competed in ADCC against one of your former students, Gordon Ryan. Before you guys competed, and I want to talk a little bit after this about, you know, when you first started training with Gordon, or I should say when Gordon first started training with you. So before that match, what were you guys talking about at ADCC before your match? I mean, what was that behind the scenes like? Like, hey, we're gonna have a match coming up here. Did you guys was it more nerve-wracking, less nerve-wracking? You guys just having fun?
Yeah, like, well, we definitely spoke about it, because just entering into the absolute, right? Like, we knew, I mean, so first of all, I know Gordon's very good at jiu-jitsu, right? So like, I knew
He
there was a
does
pretty
well.
good chance.
He does
Yeah,
well.
I knew there was a pretty good chance if he's in the absolute and I'm in the absolute. I also consider myself pretty good at jiu-jitsu. Him being a little bit bigger than me, it's like, I look at that as like, all right, it's guaranteed. Like, we're both probably going to win our first match in this absolute, like, or maybe, did we have 2 matches before we competed? I think we only had 1, and then we had to compete against each other. But either way, I knew we were going to have to end up competing against each other. So before I even entered into the absolute, we had a conversation. Hey, man, are you comfortable with this? Like, is this okay with you? Do you mind if I enter? You know what I mean? Because in my opinion, in terms of entering the absolute and in terms of him being as experienced as he is now, I defer to him back then in terms of competing in the absolute. I mean, he's much bigger than me. It would be silly for me to be like, no, Gordon, like only I get to compete in the absolute. You know what I mean? Like, I'm more experienced. It's like, yeah, but also I'm 170 pounds. You know what I mean? Like,
sure,
the guy who should be competing in the absolute should be the guy that's a little bit bigger and has a better chance of being able to deal with some of these more physical athletes. So the fact that they were going to allow both of us in there, I was just kind of like, hey, man, are you comfortable with, with the idea of us competing? He's like, yeah, sure, man, no problem. We had that little conversation. And it was just like, I just kind of like competed and went for broke, and I fucked up and turned my back to him, and he got on my back. And, the worst part is, like, in that match, and anytime you have a match against a teammate, one of the things like I fear more than anything else is like, it's not any of the things that anybody's thinking about. Like, oh man, you're competing against your student. Like, are there going to be hard feelings? None of that was I worried about at all. Like, me and Gordon are very, very good friends. I had no worry. Like, we try to beat each other up in the gym all the time. I was not worried about how this would change our relationship in any way, shape, or form. What I was most worried about is anybody going to think this match looks fake? Right. So like, I'm like, he took my back so early in the match. I was like, fuck. I was like, if I just get like fucking submitted immediately now, everybody's going to be like, oh yeah, Garry just like gave Gordon a fucking easy win in this fucking absolute division. So he gets on my back. Not only does he get on my back, he gets a fucking arm trapped. Right. So I have one hand to defend my neck. Right. And he's got this, and he's got an arm around my neck. And like, I have my chin tucked in. And I'm like, it's basically like a spot in training where I would probably just tap for the purposes of like, there's literally no way I could possibly escape this position.
It's the countdown to doom at that point. Let's just start again.
It's like, it's like, why am I going to eat your forearm in my face for the next 2 minutes when like I know what's inevitable here? Right. Like, I know that we're gonna. So I'm like, well, unfortunately, because I can't allow anybody to believe that this would be a fake match, I fucking am just going to have to die in this position. So like, I have my fucking chin tucked. He's fucking cutting my fucking lips open with his forearm. And I'm just like, okay, Garry, you're just going to have to ride this out till you're about to pass out. Otherwise, everybody's going to fucking think this is fake. So I'm just fucking gurgling and fucking spitting and shit into his forearm.
And he probably feels horrible too. He's like, what are you doing, man? Like, I got to like cross face you here and like start doing the dirty tricks to open up the throat. You're like, oh, this is horrible.
Exactly. He's probably thinking to himself, like, what a prick. Like, why is he making it so hard?
What the fuck is wrong with this guy? Well, I mean, you guys have grappled with each other probably more than any 2 people have grappled, at that level together. Going into this match with Gordon, did you have a different strategy? Like, okay, this is what I'm going to do differently than when we roll in class. I'm going to surprise him with this. Or did you just go in there and just, I'm just going to have fun?
Not really, man. I didn't. That's kind of it. Like, it's like, all right, we're both competing against each other. I know how good he is. I know I can tap him. Like, I've tapped him in the gym before. Like, it's not like, even as he got bigger and stronger than me, it's not like we didn't have competitive rounds. Like, I knew it was possible. Did I think it was highly likely that I was going to be the one that was going to beat Gordon? No, I didn't, because I know he's much bigger and stronger than me. And I know that like his technique level is very high. So to me, that match is kind of just like, hey man, like I'm competing against, I'm competing against my student, I'm competing against my teammate, somebody I train with all the time. Like, I'm going to do my absolute best to submit this guy. But like, was I thinking in my head, like, oh, am I going to do anything like super tricky to try to deceive him? Like, he knows my game so well, backwards and forwards. I don't really know if there's anything that I was going to pull out that he didn't know that I could do. You know what I mean? Right. So in my head, it didn't even make sense to try to do something like that. I'm just going to use whatever skills I have to try to beat him. You know what I mean? And like, I knew I obviously knew certain things that I was more likely to submit him with. And like, for example, like I went after his legs fairly early, and that's how I got my back exposed, because I knew my greatest chance of submitting him was submitting him on the legs. Like more often than not, if I submit Gordon in training, it's with leg locks. You know, it's a pretty great equalizer when it comes to bigger and stronger opponents. It's like my whole body versus one of his legs, right? Comparative to even taking his back, like it's still a tough task, dude. Like it's a big, strong dude, like putting up roadblocks to his neck and like being able to tuck his chin in. It's hard, man.
Yeah,
It's
and
hard.
you're a lot smaller too. Like when guys are close in, close in skill, like that size plays such a huge factor when guys can grind you out. So the ADCC being the apex of jiu-jitsu, what was it like the first day that Gordon Ryan comes in and goes, "Hey, I want to try this grappling art"?
Sorry, wait, say that again.
What was the first time that you met? You were the first one he trained with, right?
Sort of.
You and Tom DeGlass,
really.
or who was?
Not really. So, the story of. Oh, sorry. Hold on.
There's the dick shot everybody wanted. Perfect.
Yeah, exactly.
That's gonna be what we use as the thumbnail for you. It's just a shot of your crotch. What's up with Garry Tonon's?
Whoops. Sorry, not sorry. But I think so. When Gordon was doing jiu-jitsu, he started at the gym that I eventually owned, but I didn't own it back then. It was called Brunswick Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and this guy Hazim Ibrahim, which was one of Ricardo's brown belts at the time, he's now a black belt, was running this school. And Haz would pop in here and there, but he had a pretty serious full-time job working security. I think he's like in charge. I'm not sure because I haven't spoken to him in a while, but I'm pretty sure like he worked his way up in security to do private security for celebrities, and he was in charge of like all the security for concerts in the tri-state area. So he's like high up there, really, really doing like a pretty serious job that like took a lot of time away from his ability to come in and teach. So this other guy, Miguel Benitez, who now owns a school called Montgomery BJJ in Jersey, was kind of Gordon's main coach for, I want to say like maybe like the first year, at least, maybe a little bit more than that, 2 years or so of Gordon's career. I think like he was like a blue belt with a couple stripes or something like that. So that was his first instructor. Miguel's a really cool dude. He's like super motivating. He's like one of the coolest people, like very charismatic. Like I love listening to Miguel talk. And like when I first saw him, when I met him and I went to that school and I met him and Gordon, like, and I listened to him like coach a class, I'm like, holy shit, like this dude needs to have his own school. Like he really like has something special. But he was Gordon's first coach. And then Miguel kind of left for a little bit from the jiu-jitsu scene and started working NJ Transit because he wanted to start a family and have like regular income and stuff. And I don't think he had plans of opening a jiu-jitsu school back then yet. So he left, and then there was like me as an assistant instructor there because I went to Rutgers. The school was pretty close to Rutgers when I went to school, and a couple other guys. And those guys tried to strong arm the head guy that owned the school out of the school. They were like, hey, now that you're not around and Miguel's not around, we're thinking maybe we should own the school. Not maybe, sorry. They were like, we want the school. Like you're going to sell the school to us, or we're going to open a gym that's unaffiliated with you 15 minutes away from your gym. And the guy that heard this and was like, oh, is that what's going to happen? All right, sounds good. And then he had a conversation with me and he was like, listen, these fucking cocksuckers, like I'm not letting them fucking teach another day in this fucking place. He's like, I know you want to open your own school. He's like, we already have the school here. You've been teaching here for a couple of years. He's like, I believe in you a lot as an instructor. Like, if you want to take over and you want to own the school, like, I'll sell it to you. And then we worked out a deal where I paid him a certain amount of money every month. So then at that point, I became Gordon's main instructor for a couple of years. And I started training up in New York. And then I started introducing him to John and all these people. And then after that, he kind of became John's student more than he became mine. But he was still coming to my school, still training with me, him and his brother. And, the team started to get built up kind of, it was me and Eddie Cummings up with John. And then Gordon, his brother, and a couple other guys that I started training in Jersey that would come up, some guys from Canada. And that's kind of how the team started to build was so guys coming from my team and from some couple other places.
So like, let's talk about that for a second. So you're in Austin, Texas, B team's in Austin, Texas. First of all, how come everybody ended up in Austin, Texas?
So it's interesting. So when we were in Puerto Rico, before we went to Puerto Rico, before we made the team decision that we were going to go out there, we were spitballing other ideas as to where we would move because COVID restrictions were getting fucking crazy. And like our mat time at Henzo's was being compromised because, you know, they were doing the best that they could there. Like they just didn't want to cause a situation where the whole gym was going to get shut down. So everybody was, you know, we had like one time slot where we were allowed to train and for a certain period of time. And outside of that, like we weren't able to set up other training sessions. We weren't able to have all the training partners that we would normally have. There was a cap on like the amount of people we were allowed to let through the door. So it made for like a difficult training environment. And also like we were kind of getting to the point as a team where we were looking to kind of open up a school anyway somewhere. But this was the COVID situation was a catalyst for that, right? It's kind of like, all right, well now stuff's getting really shitty. So we definitely want to like kind of do our own thing. So Mo Jasm had something going on in Puerto Rico. He was out there. He was willing to facilitate financially, you know, kind of us moving out there and maybe starting a gym. And that was an offer that was put our way. But we also were thinking to ourselves, like, well, you know, Puerto Rico is Puerto Rico. Like, it's not exactly, you know, continental United States where we're comfortable with and in the same type of, you know, of training that you're going to get, you know, like different people coming in and stuff. It's going to be harder for people to get there because we're on an island and stuff, you know, harder for us to fly to competitions. So there was some thought in our heads about like maybe some other places that we could potentially go. And I would say the number one place on that list at the time was Texas. So, and for a few reasons. One, because of COVID regulations in Texas were like much more lax. Like them and Florida were the first ones to kind of be like, yeah, this is kind of silly the way we're doing things. Like we're going to kind of let people be grown adults and like take their own risks and do what they need to do, you know? So we saw that Texas was kind of handling things that way. And we're like, all right, well, maybe that would be a good place. Because, dude, at the time, like, man, had we opened up somewhere where there's crazy COVID regulations, like let's say we open up somewhere in New York, right? It's like we're going to have to deal with the same shit, or we open up somewhere else that like has, so, you know, that was too much of a risk. So we needed to open somewhere where they had like laws that were going to be favorable for running a fucking jiu-jitsu school. We were going to get shut down 2 days after we opened.
Flow grappling is in Texas, right? In Austin?
Yes. So that's where I was going to go next with this conversation. So, so during COVID, Flow changed business models. Now, I don't know if they ever announced this, you know, this is just my own conjecture. Flow used to be like a third-party organization, or Flow Grappling at least, used to be like a third-party organization that was like, hey guys, you guys are doing that cool grappling shit over there. We're just going to come in and we're going to like film that shit and then we'll advertise it a little bit on our social media and stuff. And like, you guys do what you're going to do. You throw your show, you know, you do whatever you want, but we're going to be here with the camera. We're going to catch it all and then we'll sell it. And, you know, we'll cut you in on some amount of money or whatever. And that was their business model, right? That's how Flow did things. Then I think once COVID hit and everybody was kind of shutting down, it was having a tough time starting shows and having shows different places. Flow is located in Austin, Texas. So I think they just said like, well, fuck, like Texas is letting us do shit. So, you know, and we lost the ability to film all of these shows and put them on our network. So fuck it. Like, why don't we just run the show? You know, so they started in addition to filming, now they're the ones producing, right? They're producing, you know, WNO is what they came up with. Who's number one, right? So they started to do this pro grappling show in Texas quite frequently. And it became like, I mean, IBJJF had shut down pretty indefinitely. That was one of the other main jiu-jitsu organizations. And a lot of the other spots were in different countries like Polaris and things, like they couldn't operate because in England and things were getting crazy. So man, they were kind of the only show in town. And basically Flow became the biggest media property that exists in our sport, right? Because they owned the rights basically to all the footage that is grappling. Like it was such a crazy thing how quickly all that happened. So it's like, hey man, this is where the only show in town is happening. It kind of makes sense to be near this show, right? For travel purposes and everything like that. So I think as we were in Puerto Rico and as we were thinking to ourselves, like, man, maybe this isn't the right move. You know, some people were unhappy for different reasons. We all kind of said to ourselves, like, oh man, I think Austin makes a lot of sense because Flow is there. All the tournaments are there. You know, we'll have more access to promotion. We'll have more access to the tournaments. Like everything would just be easier. And it's Texas and
Yeah.
everything's fucking open and it's very easy to do things and all that sort of
pretty
stuff.
central everywhere you want to go to in the US. And yeah, I know a
Cool.
lot of people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So I don't know if you had a chance to ever listen to it or you heard it through grappling sites, but I had Nicky Rodriguez on a few weeks back, and I pull up the 3-shot. I don't know if you got a chance to see this, but I was talking to Nicky Rod a little bit about Puerto Rico and all that. And in the very beginning, when Mom and Dad, the Danaher Death Squad, broke up, a lot of people were like, this is a marketing ploy. This is just going to be something so they can make more money. And I just asked him about that. I said, is this? Yeah, that's, we're going to get there.
They think very highly of our abilities.
I know. they're like, yeah, we're going to go do some backdoor shit. So I asked Nicky about that, and let me just pull up the 3. This is what he said.
Yeah, there were some issues within the team. You got
the volume's super low on my end. But I can kind of see the words.
You kind of have to eliminate that and focus on competition. So, at B team, we're focused on getting better, and that's about all we're focused on. We're doing our best to keep out all distractions and all negativities.
What's more important to me than that clip, personally, in my opinion, even though, yes, that clip, in my opinion, is somewhat hurtful because I think maybe he did name Gordon specifically, but by saying it like that would suggest that everybody that he left, right, is poison and bad and everything like that. And I don't think that's really fair for everybody involved. That seems kind of like rough because, I mean, if he had personal problems with Gordon, that's one thing. I don't really think he ever had any issues with John. I don't think he ever had any issues with me. So like, that's kind of a blanket statement that rubs me a little bit the wrong way, right? Like, I'm not particularly happy to hear that, right? Because I feel like I never really did anything other than be nice to any of those guys, Nicky Rod included. So I'll approach it from the perspective of myself, and I'll speak on it in that regard. I think that's a little uncalled for, overall, to address us as a blanket statement like that. And what I'm more concerned with than the statement that you actually pulled up is the other statement that he made. I don't know if you remember it. The other statement that he made was that he came to us and learned nothing.
Yeah, he said that he got most of his value from like training with the team, I believe. That was more so than directly with John. But yeah, I mean, it just seems like hey, look, personality conflicts, people just don't get along, and you decide it's better separately.
Definitely there's some personal issues, and like I said, the people that had the personal issues can elaborate on them. I wasn't one of them. I never had personal issues with Nick Rod or anybody else on that side of the team, right? These guys, like I said, they can elaborate on that. But dude, that blanket statement about the poison, and then the other statement where he says that he never learned anything, like, that's just spite for the sake of spite. And I don't really think that that's fair. Again, it's like, okay, we just talked about this previously, and you had said it, and everybody knows it, that John Danaher is one of the greatest minds in coaching, period, let alone in his specific craft, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and mixed martial arts, right? We've all recognized this. I think at this point, there's almost no people that even debate that, right? So for somebody that spent years with him, as well as everybody else that was on this team, and then the other argument you kind of can't debate is that Gordon Ryan is not only one of the greatest minds in this sport, but also, more importantly, like, he put it into practice, right? Like, he literally won. He's literally winning on a level and in a way in which nobody else has ever done it. So again, you got these two people, and then you could even argue the same about myself. Like, I mean, yes, I'm a little lighter, but like, fuck, dude, like, fucking 5 EBI titles, some of which in weight classes that were nowhere near mine, like 205, and I'm still fucking submitting people left and right. Like, it's fucking nuts, so I'm clearly bringing something to the table. So you got these 3 guys that are unmistakably like incredible martial artists, right? And then to say you walked into a room with them and then never learned anything, it's kind of crazy. Like, I didn't appreciate that. And I don't think it was called for. I'm hurt, man, more than anything. It sucks. It sucks that's the way that you know what? Cause I don't even want to say that's the way that he feels, because I know he doesn't feel that way. It sucks that that's what he's projecting into the world. And it's really unfortunate that he decided to go about it that way. Cause I don't think it was fair to any of us. And I think that, I think we deserve better. I really do.
Has there been any opportunity for Danaher, Death Squad, and I guess not really the Death Squad anymore, but New Wave, right? That's, you guys have rebranded. Have B Team competed against, and have you guys had any like mom and pop school competitions? Because I did ask Nicky, are you guys going to train together? And he's like, I'm probably going to compete against Gordon, and we're not going to be doing any like, parallel training.
Yeah. There originally, when there was like an amicable split and stuff, maybe there was thoughts that something like that would happen. I kind of knew that the way in which that had happened, that wasn't going to be the case, and it wasn't, okay, like amicable in the sense that we're not going to like talk shit about each other, with the exception of Nicky Rod. Apparently, he decided that was going to be a good idea, but amicable in that sense, but not amicable in the sense that like we're going to be working as we're co-oping teams or anything like that. Like, it's very clear, like they decided and we decided to open in the same two different gyms in the same area. We haven't finished opening ours yet. Obviously, we're going to be competing in both business as well as the actual competition of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, right? So we're going to be at odds with each other in terms of teams, so in that way we're competing against each other. We're competitors in business and in actual sport, right? So yeah, man, is it going to happen? Absolutely. I would say more than likely, because most of the lighter guys ended up going that way, with the exception of myself and Oliver Taza, but obviously I'm not competing as much in jiu-jitsu anymore. It's probably more than likely you're going to see Gordon end up competing against like Nicky Rod, right, at some point in the future. And then we'll see. I don't know if Taza will end up competing against like Nicky Ryan or Ethan, because they're both pretty close to that weight class. I think in ADCC, at least, you would probably see that. I know Taza just got his spot by winning European trials. So yeah, man, there's going to be competition, and then like, yeah, of course, like once we start building up more of a team, like once we open our gym and we have competitors and stuff, I'm sure our guys will see them in local competitions, and it's going to become a thing. And like, yeah, I mean, that's the natural nature of things, man. We're going to be at odds in business and in sport jiu-jitsu, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when that break went, you both went to Austin, was that something that you guys talked about as a team, or was it like John kind of mitigated some of the whatever the issues were or weren't, and then everyone kind of decided like as a group, let's go separately? Or was it, one person wants to leave, one person wants to leave, and then the followers kind of went with them? Or was that like a family decision?
We had originally all planned on going to Austin together, I think. And then somewhere around that time, everybody started, not everybody, but whoever had issues started. I don't even know if I would really even say they fleshed out their issues, because I don't really necessarily believe that there was a ton of conversation ahead of time. But I think like at a certain point in time, and that was my main criticism, I just wished everybody would have talked to each other a little bit more. But yeah, it kind of just happened, man. Like we were all planning on kind of going to Austin, and then, certain guys were like, yeah, nah, I think we're going to do our own thing. And then, they decided to do their own thing. And then, that left us to the point where we had to figure out what we were going to do. And, then we decided all right, well, we were planning on going to Austin. We may as well still go. And, we're not going to let that stop us. So we just kept on, with our plans. And obviously it changed things a little bit. In terms of where we were going to open and all these sorts of things, we had to figure that out. But yeah, that's kind of how that happened, man. It was pretty, it's hard to say, cause I wasn't in communication with the guys that were going to split. I'm assuming like had conversations about that ahead of time. I would imagine that would be something that they would have had to orchestrate on some level. Like they would have had to speak about it. And then the guys that, like myself and Gordon and John, like, I don't know. I think like the first notice that we got that they were interested in splitting was them saying they wanted to split. Right. So,
so it was a little bit of a shock for you guys then.
Yeah. Like I had known that there was some personal stuff going on with different people and stuff, but, it was definitely a shock to me to like get a phone call like, hey, yeah, we're leaving the team. I'm like, okay.
Like, all right. So we shouldn't all carpool to the airport together anymore, or what's the deal? Like,
yeah.
Well,
I mean, at the time I was dealing with an injury. I had torn my ACL. So, not fully, but partially. So I was I had gone to New York, and I was doing a bunch of PT and stuff, trying to get ready for my fight, cause I wanted to be able to fight still, even though I had that injury. And, so I wasn't even there, when it all happened. I just received some phone calls and stuff. But yeah, it's definitely a shock. It was hard for me to imagine a situation. Like, obviously, like I'm not, like I said, I'm not involved in any personal issues, right? Like it wasn't something that I truly felt like anybody had any issues with me.
Right. You kind of ended up being collateral damage. I mean, that's a lot of your main training partners.
Sure. So it's hard for me. Like obviously when you're trying to be empathetic, right? You're trying to put yourself in the shoes of other people, but it's hard because you're never going to be them, right? You know what I mean? You're never going to experience exactly what they experienced. It's hard for me in my life and the way that I feel about the team and everything like that. It's hard for me to imagine anything too much short of somebody like going out and mass murdering a group of people. It's hard for me to imagine too much that I wouldn't try to find a way to make it work and stick with the team. You know what I mean? Like it's hard for me to imagine something happening that would be of such gravity that I would ever leave. But that's just me. You know what I mean? Like
right.
I'm not experiencing whatever issues that those guys are experiencing. So I don't know, you know, it's hard for me to really say.
Well, seeing that they were like a big part of your training team and now John, and you guys don't even have a school open. What's your training spot look like now? How are you getting ready for fights and tournaments since you don't really have a home base opened to really facilitate that?
Yeah, it was a challenge at first. You know, we had to find a couple spots. Henzo Gracie Austin was nice enough to give us mat space twice a day. So we've been training at Henzo Gracie Austin in the morning and in the night. And then Roca Gym, which is like they sell like sports eyewear, which is really cool. They got some really cool stuff out there. They have like a private gym that I think like Tim Kennedy uses and a couple other guys pop in and do some sessions. They have athletes from not just jiu-jitsu and mixed martial arts, but all different kinds of athletes, CrossFit and different, you know, swimmers and things, all different kinds of people going in and out of that place. It's a really cool place to kind of hang out. But they give us an afternoon session to do our competition training and stuff. So I've been doing most of my fight training out there at Roca, which has been cool. And then actually 10th Planet Austin was nice enough to offer me some cage time like twice a week. So on Tuesday, Thursdays, I've been going over there and, you know, I'm not training with their guys, but they were nice enough to let us use their cage. And it's nice to be able to train in a cage because obviously that's where I'm going to be fighting. So I really appreciate them doing that, even though they know that we're planning on opening, you know, in Austin, we're opening a gym there. It's pretty nice of them to extend a helping hand to me who's fighting. Obviously, it's not related to jiu-jitsu in a sense, but it's still, you know, I'm still going to be a part of the gym that's going to be open, that's going to be competing against their gym, right? So it's nice of them to offer me to the ability to train in their cage. So I've been doing that about twice a week also. And I really appreciate that. Can't shout them out enough for letting me do that because it's really helpful for my fight career to be able to train in a cage. Hopefully we'll have one set up wherever we open our gym, but you know, for the time being, it's nice to be able to train in their cage.
So your championship bout December 5th got moved back. When's the new date?
Yeah, the new date, they didn't give me a specific date. So in person to person, they told me, so Matt Hume and Chatri told me, hey, we're going to move it a few weeks after your fight date. And then I was like, hey, what are you thinking? Like Christmas, New Year's? And they kind of were like, yeah, a few weeks. Like, you know what I mean? Like they didn't want to get nailed down for a date. I'm pretty sure. Was what I was catching by what they were telling me.
Do you know why the date got canceled or moved?
What's that?
Do you know why the date got canceled or moved?
They said that it was COVID related. Like there was like not a lot of ICU beds left in Singapore or something. So, which is kind of crazy. I mean, let's just to speak on some political shit for a second, if you don't mind.
No, for sure.
It's kind of insane. Like, so places in Asia, but Singapore specifically, they run a very authoritarian government. So like getting vax is like, I don't know exactly like what they're doing to like vax their country. I can't say exactly what their policy is, but my guess is it's basically mandatory. Like, you know, my guess is like pretty much there's only very few people that are able to slip through the cracks and not get vaccinated in that country. I would guess that the vaccination rate's probably something like 90% or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And for a country like that to be vaccinated 90% and still have problems with finding ICU beds because of COVID kind of makes me go, I don't know how important it is for everybody to be getting this vaccine because it's still, they completely self-isolated, didn't let anybody into their country and everybody's vaccinated. And yet we're still having these problems. So the idea of not letting people go eat food or travel because they're not vaccinated kind of seems fucking retarded at this point. It's like, it's like we literally have isolated experiments of people being fully vaccinated in a country, and it's being shown to basically not matter, ultimately. Now, obviously, arguably, you could say, well, the problem would be much worse if they weren't vaccinated, but it's like,
yeah,
I don't know.
Singapore is a crazy country. I remember the first time I went there, I was reading on my way over there an article about a model that was there from Australia. And I think she had, it was a real small amount. I think 2 or 3 hits of ecstasy. And if you don't know Singapore, you thought you got in trouble when mom and dad caught you. She was facing the death penalty for like 3 hits of ecstasy. And I have ADD. I think you grew up with ADHD too. So I had Adderall, and I had to fill out all these forms, and I was like, in the plane, literally sweating, like, did I fill out the forms correctly? And I was like, as we got closer, I was like, man, like every bad scenario went through my head. So I remember just dumping all of my prescription down like the toilet in like American Airlines and stuff. But I know that Chatri and Evolve are always trying to grow their team. Did they ever approach you and John about possibly moving to Singapore and having a home base out of there?
So I don't know if directly they ever said anything like that, but it became fairly obvious just in talks with him that that's definitely something that they would be interested in. I think like when I was first brought in as an athlete, he talked to me a little bit about trying to do some of my camps out there and stuff. And it's just logistically really difficult for me to do that and leave for long periods of time. Like I was running a gym at the time and things, and now we're trying to open our own gym. It's just tough, man. I mean, they have some really great trainers that Evolve, like especially for Muay Thai, like they have some of the best in the world, like Lumpini champions, every which way you look, man. So it's really cool. I did get opportunities to train out there, to spar out there. They've always been, before COVID, they've always been really good about having me train around there too. So it's been a great experience working with Evolve. But yeah, man, I know they were trying to set up a no-gi program a couple times, so that like, I'm sure, again, it's the same thing. It's like to get one of our guys to like commit to leaving and then living in Singapore. It's tough, man. It's a big commitment. Yeah. I think it's an incredible opportunity for anybody, that wants to make coaching and jiu-jitsu like, their career, but also it's a big commitment, to move to live in Asia. You got to really like it out there. You got to be okay. You got to be okay, like leaving everybody else behind, right? That like your friends and family with, and your teammates and all these sorts of things. So it's a tough thing. It's hard to get people out there, but I'm sure if we had somebody that was interested, he would love to have us have like kind of a home base at Evolve.
So now that you guys are in Austin, you don't have a full-time, you're bouncing around. What's a typical day look like for you now that you're, you're back in the States?
Man, it's pretty heavy because we've been doing like 3 days every day, except for the weekends. The weekends we're doing 2. So I try to show up to every session, whether I'm training or I'm not, because I think it's important to just kind of show that solidarity and that teamwork and like be in the room while John's teaching. John's teaching most of the classes. Occasionally he'll throw me in for a move or something just to show people I'm not an idiot and that I know what I'm doing. So they know that there's more value to the team than just John. But yeah, man, I'm showing up to as many sessions as I possibly can. So
are these all jiu-jitsu sessions, or are you working on MMA aspects too?
Two jiu-jitsu sessions a day, and then the middle one is competitive, is MMA for me, and he does a half and half. So we obviously have a competitive jiu-jitsu team too. John's pretty amazing at this because I've tried to do this at my own gym sometimes.
The gi no gi dual class type
exactly.
thing.
Do like gi no gi whatever. Like there was a period of time I remember at Henzo's where John did like he was doing gi, no gi, and he was doing MMA drills with me, like all in one class. And I'm just like, wow, this guy is fucking incredible. Like,
you just get brain lock and your head explodes. I think, but that's challenging because so many people nowadays want to do no gi, and like there's so many traditionalists that want to do gi. So it's, most schools have to decide, do we do more gi, no gi, got all these extra classes. In a perfect world, you could do a class like John where here's 2 moves that are gi, here's a move that's no gi. Then, he runs back and forth and luckily he's always wearing a rash guard. So he's always ready to do some no gi no matter where he's at, man. So I guess the real big question everyone wants to know is, if you're so busy, you got all this going on, how do you find all these ass pics to post on Instagram, man? Like, you've got some of the best collection I've ever seen in your stories.
Yeah, man. I mean, that's the easy thing for me. It's funny because it kind of gets me in trouble, not on the level of posting the ass pics per se. Like, I think everybody just kind of accepted that, including my family at this point, minus a couple of them that
your
I'm
family's
pretty sure
accepted it. No, that's great.
What's that?
I said, oh, your like, did you get some shit from your family about like, hey,
Yeah.
why all these butt pics? Like,
Yeah. Well, more like passive aggressive shit. Like I think a family member unfollowed me and like told my mom like she unfollowed me because of it's just
you got
like,
ranted
hey,
onto
like you have
mom.
my number, dude. Like just you could say something to me if you want. Like also, who gives a fuck? Fuck you. But 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 anyway, man, I no like the main way it gets me in trouble is like so people will see that like that I like share stuff like that and they'll be like, oh well, you have time to share ass pics, but you don't have time to like respond to my text message. And like one of the things people have to understand about, and this is it's kind of hard because like we very quickly moved into this age of the internet and social media like so fast, and like I don't think that we really had time to, as a society, really sit back and think to ourselves like, okay, you know, what's appropriate and what's not. And like what, when I say appropriate, I'm not talking about you know, ass pics or anything like that. I mean, like in terms of the way that we handle our social interactions. Like we now have this computer in the palm of our hands that allows us to be in touch with each other 24/7. But like, is that a requirement? Like, should that be expected of me? Right, is the question. And I don't think we ask ourselves these questions enough. I don't think we've clearly defined what the rules are for that social media landscape. Like some people, I think, believe that if they sent you a text message, they're entitled to a response within the next 15 to 20 minutes, or you're an asshole. And like, dude, anybody that has, I'm sure you included, running the, you know, successful podcast and all the things that you do, like, dude, like, I'm sure you're getting messages on 16 different fucking forums. You got a message on your email, you got a message in your text, you got a message in your Facebook, you got a message in your Instagram, you got a message in your Twitter, you got a fucking, and in addition to these messages, the direct messages, you got comments on things. And dude, there's so much to worry about on a given day-to-day basis. It's like, man, if I get to it, I get to it. Like, and if I don't, and it's important enough, like send me another message, right?
Right.
And I think that this idea, like me posting ass pics on my social media, that's my recreational time. That's me flipping through my phone, liking chicks' asses, and just hitting share. That's all that's required for that. Like when I respond to my mom's text message, that's a fucking emotional investment. That's like me, like, oh fuck, like what's she gonna think of like what this sentence is that I'm about to send to her, and like how, what are the repercussions of that? Like there's anxiety involved in that. There's no anxiety involved in posting ass pics. All right, let me have my fucking relaxation time and leave me alone. If I don't get back to your goddamn text message, chill the fuck out. But anyway, I don't know if you can tell, I get a little fired up about that. But yeah, man, I love making time for sharing aspects.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on and to talk about everything, and I wish you all the success in the world, man. And if you're ever in South Florida, come hit me up, bro.
Absolutely, man. Love to. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely, bro. Take it easy, man. Take care.